working directly with people, we get a whole bunch of organizations and people in the community and people from your school and people from the government to work together to solve problems.
Oh, very good. Now, we invited her here today to talk to us about homelessness. What is United Neighbors' interest in this issue?
Well, we're concerned that everybody, adults and children, have a warm place to live and good food to eat and clothes to wear and a nice neighborhood to live in. So we work to make sure we can help people make that happen.
Now, I'm going to have a question for you guys. Okay. Do you know anyone who doesn't have a home? Do you know anybody who doesn't have a home? You do know somebody who has homeless people? Homeless people. You know people that don't have homes. Now, what happens when some people lose their home? What happens when that happens?
Well, you know, some people lose their home for lots of different reasons. Sometimes there's a terrible tragedy like a fire or a flood, or sometimes they have to move in with another family to support them. So right now we have people who don't have homes. They're living in lots of different places. Some of them I know, Kyle, you said that people are homeless. Do you mean that those people live outside? Right, some people do that. But some people right here in our community, they're putting them to live in a motel. You know what a motel is? Like a hotel? So have you ever lived in a hotel? Did you ever go on vacation and stay overnight in a hotel before? So is it fun? Do you think it would be fun if you and 3 brothers and sisters and 2 parents had to live there for a long time? No. Do you think it would be fun if you could only take with you what you could fit in 1 suitcase? If I gave you 1 suitcase and said, that's all you could take with you, would you be able to make a decision what to take? So these are some of the things that children that are living in motels have to worry about.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wendy. You've given us an awful lot to think about today and pray about. Kaya, would you take the offering for us? Is that okay? Or anybody have an offering today to give this morning? That'd be great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Where do we put those things normally? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, why don't you put those over there, and can you grab that? That's it. Oh, wow. This is my first time doing this. Can you tell? Would one of you like to pray?
God, I love you.
Thank you. That's a good prayer. Dear God, I love you. Well, thank you so much, and thank you to Wendy, Garf-Lipp. Thank you so much. Okay, can you find your seats? We have the message today.
Chapter 15, verses 7 through 11. If there is a poor man among your brothers in any of the towns of the land that the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted towards your poor brother. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend him whatever he needs. Be careful not to harbor this wicked thought. The 7th year, the year for canceling debts, is near, so that you do not show ill will towards your needy brother and give him nothing. He may then appeal to the Lord against you, and you will be found guilty of sin. Give generously to him, and do so without a grudging heart. Then because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore I command you to be open-handed towards your brothers and toward the poor and needy in your land.
Trevor was 11 years old. He lived in a suburban community of Philadelphia, and he was watching TV, and he saw a news report about homeless people in Philly. They were sleeping on the subway grates to keep warm. The steam from the subway exits through the tunnels and then through these grates. Trevor waited patiently for his father Frank to return from work and met him at the door with his blankie, his old security blanket. Trevor told Frank that he wanted to travel to Philadelphia and give the blankie to one of the homeless people sleeping on the grates. After a few moments of discussion, when Frank and his wife Janet tried to dissuade Trevor, they finally acquiesced, and the family got into their sedan and traveled the 30 minutes to Philadelphia. Frank drove through the streets until they did find a man sleeping on one of the subway grates. Frank and Trevor exited the car, and Janet, who remained in the car, immediately locked the doors. Trevor approached the man and handed over his blankie. The Farrell family traveled back home, all feeling really good about themselves, and especially proud of their 11-year-old son. When Frank came home from work the next day, Trevor was waiting with a handful of blankets that he found in the basement and the attic, and insisted on going back into the city to distribute them. Once again, his parents tried to talk him out of it, but in the end, they loaded up the car and cruised the streets of Philly, handing out blankets to the homeless sleeping on the subway grates. Frank and Janet were pretty confident that this was the end, because Trevor had exhausted their supply of blankets. You can imagine their reaction the next day when they returned from work and discovered that Trevor had gone door to door asking neighbors to give him blankets for the homeless. Once again, the Farrells indulged their son, confident that he had pretty much exhausted the supply of blankets in the community. Well, the next day, unbeknownst to Frank and Janet, Trevor took the money from his piggy bank and went to the local newspaper office. He was intending to buy a classified ad asking for people to donate blankets. Serendipitously, that day, the person working in the classified department was out sick, and a college intern was covering the desk. When he spoke to Trevor, he decided that he had a really great human interest story here, and he interviewed Trevor. The article appeared the next day, and by the next afternoon, the entire front lawn of the Farrell home was filled with blankets and warm clothing. Trevor then began an outreach effort that has since developed into Trevor's Place, a shelter for men, Trevor's Next Door, a shelter for women and children, Trevor's Endeavors, a summer camp for inner city youth, and the Trevor Outreach Vans. Every night, 2 or 3 vans staffed by one member from Trevor's Endeavors and volunteers from community-based organizations and faith-based communities go out into the streets of Philadelphia, bringing hot coffee, soup, sandwiches, blankets, and warm clothing directly to the people that do not come to the shelters, the ones that live in the park or under the L or in abandoned buildings. Learning about Trevor and his work was a transformative moment for me. I came to the startling realization that although I always perceived homelessness as a giant, complex, unsolvable problem, an 11-year-old child showed me that with compassion, support, and vision, things could be done that would make a tangible difference in the world. And a little child shall lead us. For many years, I would take busloads of teens to Philadelphia to see Trevor's Place, spend a day working at one of the shelters, following the vans when they went out with coffee and food. You can imagine what it looked like when a giant luxury bus pulled up in front of the famous Philadelphia love sculpture, and 50 teens exited, set up tables, filled them with hot food, warm clothing, blankets, and food. The homeless approached us with trepidation, but soon realized that the teens were there to provide help, comfort, and conversation. The teens had an opportunity to talk with these people, helping change their perception of homelessness, hearing the stories, learning about the conditions of homelessness, and the issues that brought people to the street, and the obstacles and barriers that exist for these folks. It was not unusual that we returned home with many teens without winter jackets, gloves, scarves, hats, and in some cases, shoes. The teens felt compelled to donate their personal belongings to these new friends that they made in the streets of Philadelphia. One of the most memorable moments was when a teen got off the bus, sans coat, scarf, hat, and sneakers, and his mom asked him angrily, "What could have possibly motivated you to give away your brand new Land's End jacket and your very expensive Nike sneakers?" He quietly answered, "He needed them to stay warm. I have more than I need, and he does not. Isn't that what you taught me? Isn't that the right thing to do?" In Deuteronomy 15, verse 7, we say, "If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites, in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God has given you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted towards them. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. A look at interpretations of these verses show us that it's forbidden to insult the poor or accuse them of being poor because of their own devices. In a national atmosphere that has moved beyond Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty to our present-day war on the poor, this verse resonates in the public theater of conversation. Be careful not to harbor this wicked thought. The 7th year, the year for canceling debt, is near, and so you do not show ill will towards the needy among your fellow Israelites and give them nothing. They may then appeal to the Lord against you, and you will be found guilty of sin. From this we learn it's an obligation to generously support a kinsman who is falling on hard times, without calculating whether we will be repaid. Give generously to them, and do so without a grudging heart. Then because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. This is not so much as a loan, but an investment in a decent, compassionate, stable society. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-hearted to your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land. As depressing as it is to contemplate, the scripture assures us that there will always be poor in the land. We are realistic when we look at the world and realize that poverty comes from a variety of determinants, including things of which we have no control, floods and droughts and wars and disease. So do we simply throw up our hands and say we have no control over what might happen that will cause reversal of fortunes and abject poverty? On the contrary, this verse teaches us that we must build solutions to poverty into the social structure of our society and not rely solely on people's generosity. People should never be made to feel embarrassed to accept help, because giving is an obligation and not charity resulting from kind-heartedness. We have a clear biblical directive to open our hands and open our hearts to those in our community in need. But we also have an obligation to create a society in which we recognize the needs to build a system of support into our day-to-day living. We recognize that we might not be able to ever solve the problem completely, but we are obligated to help the person create a safety net and give generously, but with dignity and honor to the recipient. In our community, and in Massachusetts in general, the numbers in homelessness are staggering. The numbers continue to rise. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, 2011, there were 16,664 people in the streets counted as experiencing homelessness on Massachusetts on the day of the count. As of August 7, 2013, there were approximately 3,500 families with children and pregnant women in Massachusetts Emergency Assistance Shelter Program. 1,528 of these families with children were being sheltered in motels. The number does not count those families who are doubled up, living in unsafe conditions, or sleeping in their cars, or the approximate 6,400 families who are still being served by the state's home-based rental assistance program, which is timing out very shortly. 2011 data from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, released in August of 2012, estimates that 13,157 high school-age students in public schools are experiencing homelessness on any given day in Massachusetts. That number includes an estimated 5,800 unaccompanied high school students who are experiencing homelessness and not in their custody of their parent or legal guardian and are still going to school. It is estimated that there are 44,000 students of all ages experiencing homelessness who are enrolled in Massachusetts public schools. The average age of a person experiencing homelessness is 8 years old. The number of individuals experiencing homelessness has more than doubled since 1990. On any given night, the approximate 3,000 night shelter beds for individuals are full. Sexual violence and homelessness are often interconnected. Poverty contributes greatly to homelessness. The Great Recession has severely impacted very low-income families in Massachusetts. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the overall poverty rate in Massachusetts is 11.6%. This includes an estimated 738,514 people in Massachusetts living in households that fell below the poverty threshold. The poverty line is $23,021 for a family of 4. That's the poverty line. Not surprisingly, poverty has a direct correlation to families or individuals losing their housing. For 2011, it was reported that 46.2 million Americans, or 15% of our population, were living below the poverty line. According to the latest data, the number of people living in poverty is comparable to the combined populations of Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Vermont. This is the highest number of people living in poverty in the United States since 1959, when the federal government began to take this measurement. Equally startling is the majority of impoverished families and individuals live far below that $24,000 poverty line. Right here in our greater Fall River community, we have a growing problem of homelessness and families living in motels. Right now, there are more than 2,000 families statewide living in motels. These are families that are eligible for low-income housing, but Massachusetts has simply run out of housing for these folks. We presently have families in motels in Swansea, Somerset, and Dartmouth. Some of the families have been there for upward of a year. Some families come in for a short time and they are moved out to another motel somewhere else in the state. Many of these families are not originally from our area. The state places these families in whatever motel has space. So even if you are from Fall River, you might end up in a motel in Western Mass or north of Boston, far away from your family's support, your children's schools, and your friends. In our community, there are 100+ families settled in motels. Add to that the families from the condemned properties, the families from the recent fire, and that number doubles. Now add homeless teens, people on the street, folks living in shelters, and the number reaches an epidemic proportion. The state pays $82.50 per day for each motel room. Last year, they vowed to end the practice of putting people in motels by June of 2013. Since then, the population of families living in motels has increased by 34%. The situation is complex, political, and with no quick fix. I will continue to raise my voice and my pen in support of legislative solutions, increased budgetary dollars, and more affordable housing. But there are 150 children under the age of 10 living in a motel right in our community. There are 200 families, each sharing one motel room with 3, 4, or 5 others. There are 200 families without access to cooking facilities, grocery stores, laundry, bus stations, healthcare, friends, family. We might not be able to fix the complex issues of statewide and community homelessness, but we can tackle smaller day-to-day issues that support these families. We can unite community resources and work collaboratively to support short-term solutions and repair that safety net. United Neighbors and Greater Fall River Partners for a Healthier Community have convened a task force, Greater Fall River Partners for Health and Well-Being, that supports the families in motels. We have representatives from 20+ organizations and faith-based communities, and we work collaboratively to provide basic resources and support. Our work represents the strength of the community: food for the holidays, gently used clothing, toiletries, school navigation, baby gear, books, tutoring, support groups, counseling, and friendship. I pride myself on being a creative, wide thinker, but I feel stymied looking at this complex issue of homelessness. It becomes manageable when I work in collaboration. It becomes manageable when I work with others tackling the day-to-day concerns, supporting these families, providing resources, and keeping the conversation in the public view. We need each and every one of you to join us in our efforts. First off, talk about the issue. Let people know what's happening right here in our community and in the greater Massachusetts and U.S. communities. Our struggles are similar to what is happening in large and small cities across the country. Give generously. Your money, your time, your gently used clothing. Help organize for us toiletry drives, gift card drives, book drives. Help with tutoring, preparing warm meals for Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, or just because it's Wednesday. Providing opportunities for the families to come to your church and be part of your community. Speak to your representatives and let them know that you are concerned about the issue and you want them to keep it in the forefront of political discourse. And join our collaboration, Greater Fall River Partners for Health and Well-Being. Our next meeting is Wednesday, November 20th at 8:30 a.m. at CD Rep. Speak up, stand up, reach out, open your hands. I often think of that teen who returned home from Philadelphia without a coat or a hat or scarf or sneakers. I remember thinking that this 15-year-old got it. He naturally understood that we are interconnected and have responsibilities to one another. He recognized that sometimes difficult situations require sacrifice. He gave wholeheartedly with compassion, dignity, and honor. Give generously to them and do so without a grudging heart. Then because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. May you always be blessed. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Phil, also for proclaiming the Deuteronomy lesson for us today. Definitely, indeed, a powerful message and food for thought for our reflection. Let's take a few moments and we can stand as you are able, and we will sing our song of commitment, which is 42 in the hymnal, Seek Ye First.